Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my guide for FTB Sky's Expert Mode. Today I'll be finishing up Chapter 1 as well as automating RF power. Before I get to any of that though, I'd like to sort out my food situation. There are many things you could eat, but I think instead of eating endless mushroom stew, I'm going to make some dumplings. It's a pretty simple thing to make. You just need some onion, cabbage, dough, and some type of protein. Mushrooms work too, however. Onion seeds don't come from anywhere as it's just a full onion that you get, so I need to make a market to trade for one. If you have any spare emeralds from the wandering traders as they come by, you can just spend one and get a wild onion. Farming mushrooms is quite easy. You can farm them by using a material generator on crimson nylium for red mushrooms and warp nylium for brown mushrooms. To make the dumplings, you'll need a cooking pot. Simply make one, place it on a stove or campfire, and let it sit. Every stack of ingredients makes 2 stacks of dumplings, so I would just put a stack of stuff in, take one with you, and leave the other for when you need it again. Next on our laundry list of things to do, I'd like to be able to start flying around the base. Yeah, you can get that this early. You should have source coming in automatically at this stage, regardless of how you're getting it through your Vitalic source link, whether you have a witch farm like I do, or just that regular little baby mob farm you get from the quest reward. The first thing you'll need to do is make a tablet of Summon Wilden, or maybe a few of them if you get unlucky. If you have high looting and get lucky, you won't need more than one, but you get the point. Put it on your ritual brazier, activate it with a right click, and it should start summoning different types of Wilden mobs from Ars Nouveau. Each of the Wildens has its own drop, but we're after Wilden hunters as they drop Wilden wings. Note that you'll also need a couple of diamonds to craft this. Make sure you've gotten some from loot or goats or whatever. If you don't have any right now, there'll be a way to get some pretty easily really soon. I don't make any of this video, but by putting a coal coke block in the pressure chamber you can get a diamond. That's right around the corner, and I do get to the pressure chamber this episode, I just don't make any diamonds. Anyway, you'll want to make sure you place your ritual pedestal next to a source jar that has source in it. It's going to draw a source from it, and that's what renews the ritual. They're extra cheap in this mob pack, so this basic mob farm should be more than enough to keep it stocked and still give you plenty for crafting. This is completely unnecessary as I looted that white rock from that village last episode, but I'll make some legitimately anyway. Note that you only need 5 white rock to make the Petal Apothecary, then you can just make a pure daisy and make more white rock with that. To use the Petal Apothecary, fill it with water, then with the ingredients, and finally throw in a seed of any type. This will make the flower you're trying to make. With an empty hand, you can right-click a filled Petal Apothecary that has water in it to input the recipe you just put in before, and then you can just spam the empty hand right-click and seeds. Because they're so cheap, I would recommend making a few of them. I'm gonna make 4. That just means I have 4 times the processing speed because I tend to make things in large batches with these. Also, remember that you can right-click any regular flower with bone meal to mass produce it, as well as the mystical flowers from Britannia. Obviously not the functional ones, just the regular colored ones you find. After getting some inert crystals by putting source gem blocks next to pure daisies, it's time to start Elementalcraft. While normally you would collect elements from nodes, in this pack that's been disabled, so all generation is done using the Elemental Evaporator. It's much faster than it is by default. Element is kinda like a fluid that exists on its own pipe system, I guess you could say. You store it in elemental containers, and move it around with element pipes. Element pipes are garbage, quite frankly. The worst here loses 80% of the element going through it. Only 20% of what goes makes it to the other side, which is insanely bad. The next tier up loses 40%, but you might as well upgrade as fast as possible because you can make it almost right away. The last tier is lossless, which you'll definitely want to make when you get that available, but of course that's not available yet. To make element, you simply place the element evaporator on top of one of the element containers. That way the element goes from the evaporator into the container, and then it'll go through your pipe towards the other container, which will have the elemental infuser on it. Place an item for crafting on the elemental infuser, and as long as the container has element in it, it will infuse it with that element. The first thing I'm making is some drenched steel by putting steel ingots on it, and that will allow me to produce better pipes that don't lose almost all of the stuff they make. Also, I forgot to mention, but you shift-click on the end of a pipe attached to a container that you want to extract from if you want to extract from a container and move it to another one. Your regular mob farm should be producing at least a small amount of air, earth, and fire shards, but water is probably not being automatically produced. In a quest reward, you can get a fishing net and a fishing rod that's pretty good enchanted, and by putting an item collector out and having the fisher do its fishing job, you'll be able to acquire a lot of fish. Fish can be exported from a dispenser using a redstone signal to deploy the fish into the water, and as long as you get to kill it with your sword, it'll drop water shards. When I revamp the mob farm later in the episode, I'll just be doing it in a slime chunk to get water shards, but for now the fish will do. It helps that I have looting 3 on my sword, and if I have a superstitious hat artifact that boosts up to looting 4. And if you put your sword in the elemental infuser with water, you can even make it looting 5. I'll get to tool infusing in just a moment though. Amethyst with water essence makes springaline shards, but you could have gotten those from loot in the nether village. Naturally, I made one myself anyway. Combining a springaline shard, a steel plate, the elements, and a living rock, you can make a mana pool. I would stock up on elemental essences in the imbuement chamber if you can help it. You know, if you have the spare shards, it's never a bad thing to have more of them, especially because Manasteel will require 1 of each. This marks the advent of Chapter 2. Yup, we made it all the way through Chapter 1, now we'll get to the next stage. There's a lot that opens up at this point. You can see many branching paths, but which one will I take first? Well, there's only one answer, and that's the Manasteel Mesh. Easily the best thing to go after before anything. As mentioned before, tools and weapons can be imbued with elements to give them a pseudo-enchanted effect. This allows it to go one stage beyond what it had before, so if you have Fortune 3, you can get Fortune 4. However, one in particular stands out and is particularly useful. By infusing with fire on a tool specifically, you will get auto-smelt. What's so great about auto-smelt? Well, remember our good old buddy the material generator? And how with pedestals you can put a tool in your offhand to put it on the pedestal? When the material generator uses a tool, it imbues it with the properties of that tool. So if we put on an auto-smelt pickaxe on this andesite, it'll smelt the andesite cobblestone into andesite. This also works with things like Silk Touch, but Silk Touch isn't nearly as easy to get. This auto-smelt is more or less free, so might as well make as many auto-smelt stone pickaxes as I can get. Who wants egg production? Well, we kinda need it right now, as I'm about to make cakes. Cakes are gonna be how we make our mana for Britannia setups. I'll probably do a lightning round of all the easy to do mana generators later, but for right now we're just going to work with those cakes. I could get my eggs through deep mob learning, but I don't really have power infrastructure right now, and I don't even really care enough to do that, so I'm just going to make a free egg farm inside a compact machine. I'm choosing a compact machine because while I'm not going to be able to automate with that yet, I can at least have a bunch of chickens in a compact machine to mitigate the lag that having a lot of chickens out would normally produce. Or if I want to get technical, yes, it's the frame rate, but I just call it lag either way. If it's frame rate lag, it's still lag. Rain can get kind of annoying, so a rain shield will just get rid of it for me. Or at least stop me from seeing it. Alright, let's finish up that cake, shall we? To get started with the cake, I'm gonna need to make some flour. Flour is just wheat processed in the millstone. Put cake batter, milk, eggs, and sugar into a basin and mix it with the mechanical mixer and it will make liquid cake batter. From there, I would just bucket it out and put it in another basin so it can be pressed into raw cake base. I'd make at least 4 cakes in your first batch. It's pretty easy to do it, and it's not like it's that expensive. and I'm just gonna mooch off of the main line of diesel generators. Again, nothing's cleaned up yet because I haven't gotten around to it, but I'll get to it eventually, not this episode though. The other main ingredient is going to be icing. Icing is made from sugar, milk, and sweet berries. From there you can just dump that into a spout from a mechanism tank or something, and then that'll ice those smoked cake bases. I should have mentioned you have to smoke them, I guess, but you know, JEI. I'm also not just stalling to fit all this footage in. Why would I do that? The last things we need to get some mana going are the Kekamiras itself, which is just cake, 2 orange petals, 2 brown petals, 2 white petals, and a soul powder, and then a mana spreader. The Kekamiras is of course very simple to make, just do it in the Petal Apothecary. The mana spreader is made in the enchanting apparatus. You know, you can follow JEI, I've done all this before, or at least stuff close enough to it. You know, remember when I said I was gonna cheat a lot at the beginning of this series? I haven't actually done a whole lot of that. I just find that funny. To use the Kekamiras, first place down your mana pool, then place down the mana spreader so that it faces the mana pool, then place down the Kekamiras so it's linked to the mana spreader, and then place down your cake so that the Kekamiras can eat it. It'll automatically eat through those cakes, and I'm gonna go do some preparation while that's happening. After putting one of each element on the pedestals around the enchanting apparatus and then a drenched steel in the center, I can make magically inclined steel. And then once that's done, I can just chuck that in the mana pool, and as long as it has enough mana in it, it will make it into a Manasteel ingot. 3 more Manasteel ingots, and it's the moment you've all been waiting for. The Manasteel Mesh I was so happy to get started with. Unlike the Andesite Mesh, this has its own loot table for gravel. It's more of an upgrade to almost any other table for any other sifting, but for gravel you don't get iron shards or copper shards anymore, and instead just get raw forms of all of the ores that you can smelt directly into ingots. You also end up getting a few new metals like tin and lead, but of course the best thing to get is just not having to do all that stuff with the primitive slurry to get iron. I'll have to wait until the assembly table to do everything I want with bees, but I can at least start by making advanced beehives and expansion boxes. This is going to allow automation of beehives so that they're able to produce more resources for us. I'm not going to abuse them or anything, but I will at least use them for some things like wood and some types of stone. Just having the advanced beehive gives you access to seeing what bees are inside of the hive, and allows you to just put in bottles to automatically extract honey and honeycombs. You'll still need to have caution though, as the bees can still just go out and fall into the void at current. I will be getting simulation upgrades later to stop this from happening, but you could also box the bees in if you want. You get at least 1 sturdy bee cage from a quest reward. These won't break if you use them, and it's useful to have when organizing your bees. I also got a second one from the Sky Village. The first specialized type of bee I'd like to go over is lumber bees. They go and use wood logs as their hive, and once they go to a wood log, they will come back and produce wood chips. These wood chips are 1/9 of a log, so they're kinda crap for early game. But that's why we're going to be upgrading it later. Again, we have to do some Pneumaticcraft progression before we get there though. I'm just kinda demonstrating it now. To get a lumber bee, right click on a bee with a cascading archwood sapling. Shift right click with a filled sturdy bee cage on one of those hives and it will set the bees home to that hive. To go over bee stats real quick, most of them are fairly self-explanatory, like diurnal means it's active during the day, nocturnal means it's active during the night. Most bees are not nocturnal. The one that's important though is productivity. I did end up getting a bee with high productivity. It would sure be a shame if I didn't think to capture it so that it wouldn't fall into the void and die. But that's life, I guess. Bees be stupid. Higher productivity means that it'll make more at a time in the beehive. Shh, don't tell anyone, but there are hidden barrels all along the Sakura Grove's starter base. I would recommend making some fluid extractors early. This way you have latex production for when you actually start needing latex rubber for plastic sheets and such. The fluid extractor will take latex from any log you put in front of it. Eventually the log will break, but for right now I'm just gonna put a couple down and call it good enough. If you want to be really efficient, acacia is the best type of wood to get this from, but oak is good enough for the time being. I decided to actually build something for a change. It's not done yet, but I'm working on a nice house that fits the style of the Sakura Grove starter, you know? I wanted to keep some consistency, I guess, within the things I build on the island. The main purpose for this building is going to be resource generation through sifting. In the back I have a sort of zen garden that uses pedestals in order to generate the blocks that get sifted. Something worth noting about pedestals is that, much like the auto-smell pickaxes I was using before, the material generators also respond to hammers, so if you hammer what you are getting out of as sand, it will make it into dust, and cobbled netherrack will turn into regular netherrack. It's really convenient to move items around because pedestals operate wirelessly, so I could just use create power through the floor. I apologize for jumping around a bit, but I'm gonna get a little bit of Pneumaticcraft going now. Ultimately, my goal is to automatically manage all this sifting, and I'm gonna need some Pneumaticcraft stuff in order to get there. I didn't show the crafting of the reinforced stone, but that's just 4 other stone and 4 deep slate in with a sturdy sheet, and that makes 8 of them. The quest wants you to make a 5x5x5 pressure chamber, but for starting off, I'm just going to make a 3x3x3 instead. This is better for me because 1, I don't know where I'm going to set it up yet, and 2, I just don't want to wait for the pressure to rise right now. I'll eventually be using the 5x5x5, but for now the smaller one is more than enough. To get started with building a pressure chamber, it's going to be a box. All the corners have to be pressure chamber walls. The centers can be walls, specialized blocks, or glass. The special pressure glass, that is. You're going to want to place them so that the interfaces have one interface facing outward and one facing inward. That means that one side is going to face blue on the outside and the other is going to face orange on the outside. The first way of generating compressed air is going to be the rotational compressor. This is why I set it up right next to my create generators. However, be mindful that the rotational compressor has to be rotating in the correct direction in order to create compressed air. If need be, a gear shift or gearbox can correct the rotational direction. The first way I'll be feeding this is just by using pedestals. Pedestals are easy and convenient to use, so I'm just going to stick one on each interface. Then I just have to place some of the input items on the input pedestal and make sure that enough pressure is inside the pressure chamber. If you are going to start small and not automated, I would definitely recommend babysitting this thing, as if you let it get above 5 bars, it's going to explode. If the rotational compressor isn't working, it might not be rotating with enough speed. If you're familiar with the ideal gas law, you'll feel right at home with Pneumaticcraft's pressure system. To explain it in simplest terms possible, pressure and volume are equal to the number of moles of gas times the gas constant times the temperature. For our purposes, the gas constant is meaningless and the temperature is mostly meaningless as far as compressed air itself goes. You will need temperature management on machines, but that's not the point here. It doesn't affect the compressed air. Pressure in the pressure chamber is a function of the volume and number of moles of air inside the pressure chamber. Generally speaking, you just want to compare that amount of air relative to the base volume of the pressure chamber. The volume of air inside the pressure chamber divided by the pressure chamber's internal volume will give you the number of bars of pressure you have. Naturally, because of how pressure works, the smaller pressure chamber is going to increase in pressure faster than the larger one. However, the larger one is going to be more buffered, so to speak. It's generally recommended that you use the bigger ones as soon as you can support them, but for early game, if you don't want to wait very long, the smaller one does the job fine. The overall purpose of this diversion was to make a compressed iron sheet. This is so that I can make a drawer controller. However, I need to turn compressed iron into overcharged iron. This is just done by putting it on a depot underneath an energizer and feeding it both rotational energy and energy from a generator. Sometimes recipes in the mechanical crafter won't fill up the entire grid. This will be true if you either just have a big one for general use, or you have recipes like these gears that have disconnected items with holes on all sides. In the event of this, you want to make sure you're applying rotational power and giving it a redstone signal. Because I'm using the hand crank, I will be using a little bit of crank, make sure it's moving, then press the button, then keep cranking. But if you're automating the input, then you just have to press the button and it'll craft. The item transporters aren't quite working, but I did make a drawer controller and some controller extensions. By using a linking tool, which you will need a diamond to get, you can link your drawer controller to the drawers you want to store things in. I'm putting those on the floor below this. Extensions act as inputs for the storage controller network without needing to make more controllers. Drawers don't have to be made of wood, they can also be made of whatever material you want them to be. By using frame drawers and crafting them in the pattern you see, you can alter the appearance of the outside, the trim, and the face of each of the drawers you make. Generally, it's good to pick something easy to see contrast in for the front face. While I absolutely could have used an omnidirectional hopper in hindsight, I have this slightly complex system instead. For some reason, item transporters won't export out of the sifters, and they also won't go into the drawer controller. I don't know why. So what's going on here is that the drawer is importing with a puller upgrade from the sifter, but it doesn't export into the drawer controller, so you have to export it up into a buffer chest, and then you can use the item transporter to move it from the chest into the controller extension. I don't know why it's so complex, but that's how it is. This woodcutter is good for simplifying production of wood products, as well as saving you materials sometimes with stuff such as stairs where you normally lose it. The next thing I'm going to rush to is silver. To do that, I'm first going to need a mineral sapling. This is just made by throwing an oak sapling in the mana pool. I can then throw mineral logs into the squeezer to liquefy them. You'll be able to get more out of them when you have better machines, but for right now I just want some of the liquid anyway. Note that the saplings need a decently large cleared space to grow, unlike regular saplings, especially since they have those roots. The next step is a thermo-pneumatic processing plant. It requires a machine frame, and that requires heavy engineering blocks, which requires overcharged iron, so I needed all of that to make this anyway. Machine frames are made in the Mechanical Crafter, and you get 2 per craft as of version 1.2.0. They're a main component for all thermal and Pneumaticcraft machines. Afterwards, grab some cinnabar, which can be gotten by sifting dust with a Manasteel Mesh. Given that the TPPP uses both compressed air and temperature to function, you're going to want to put it on your line of pressurized tubes, as well as using some heat sources. The easiest all-purpose heat source that doesn't have a heat restriction on how high you can go is the blaze burner. This will handle most recipes that require excess heat. It does have some issues with recipes that require lower heat though, but we'll get there when we get there. Anyway, put some of that mineral and cinnabar into the thermopneumatic processing plant and you'll get some quicksilver. Then throw some redstone into the mana pool to get mana powder, and then throw both of those into the supercooler and you will make raw silver. While I'm on the topic, I'm going to go over heat just a little bit. So to heat up Pneumaticcraft machines, you can use a number of heat sources. The easiest of these is a blaze burner for on demand, but you'll also want to make sure you insulate your machines as it loses heat to the environment. Any block will do, though I recommend thermal lagging on faces that let you access the machine. You can click through thermal lagging rather than other blocks. Some recipes will require extremely cold temperatures rather than extremely hot ones, so be careful of that when we get to that point. I returned to the Nether Village to both raid its loot properly and to see if I can find some netherite scrap. I end up finding a bunch of ingots in loot chests, but I don't find any netherite scrap in the chests. So instead I'll have to look for ancient debris spawning in the bases of netherrack underneath the platforms of the village. It's somewhat rare, not like super rare, but it's common enough to where you should probably find at least one. Make sure that if you do find one to process it in the squeezer to get double output potentially. The reason I'm looking for this is that I need it for a ritual coming up. I'm going to plan on summoning a Djinni Crusher. However, I can't get one of those yet, so I have a bit of infrastructure I need for occultism. This starts with golden chalk. I don't have any gold powder right now, so I made a pulverizer in order to get some. Ultimately, I still needed a fully crusher anyway, as the one I had essence decay and it eventually despawned, but thankfully the Djinni Crusher will not despawn once I get to him. Pulverizers are good infrastructure anyway, and you can speed them up to be pretty quick. So, by combining some basic chalk with some gold powder and some glowstone dust, I can make a golden chalk. I'm gonna be cheap here and temporarily steal the bowls from my first circle to make the second summoning circle. This in particular is what I needed that netherite scrap for. Combine that with a Void Prism and mana-infused copper, and I can summon an Endermite. Note that you'll have to throw an egg into the circle, or it's not going to recognize the ritual as started. Once the ritual is finished, you can kill the possessed Endermite it creates, and you'll get a little bit of Endstone. You can then give one of those to your Foliot Crusher, and use the other in order to make a material generator to produce more Endstone. The crushed Endstone combines with obsidian dust and a white chalk in order to make the purple chalk that you'll need to make the next circle. I'm also going to require some skeleton skulls for the next circle, so that means I'll be summoning a possessed skeleton using the same circular setup that I had for the Endermite. I think it's called Hadron's Lure, which is used for Foliot related summonings. Because of my extremely high level of looting, I was able to get 4 skulls from the one skeleton. If I didn't mention it before, you can infuse swords with water in Elementalcraft to get an extra level of looting. With all that out of the way, I can finally summon my Djinni Crusher. Occultism's Crushers have a special trait where they give bonus outputs the higher the tier you go. The Foliot does double your ores, like if you give it a raw ore it'll give you 2 dust. Most mods don't do that anymore as of the advent of this whole raw ore thing that I'm not 100% fond of, but you know, that's how it is. The Foliot gives you 1 extra output. The Djinni gives you 2 extra outputs. This also works for things like Springlin Shards into Springlin Dust, so it's definitely something worth your time. The Djinni is also much faster than the Foliot and doesn't decay. Because silver takes actual effort to make right now, I definitely would triple all of your silver that you get from raw silver. The next machine I'd like to make is an Induction Smelter. This is going to be useful for making alloys, but particularly it allows creation of Electrum. Electrum is a very useful alloy for coins because it's going to let us get dreadful dirt. Because I'm feeling kind of lazy right now, I'm just going to steal some blast brick from the blast furnace, so I've prepared about a stack of steel in advance. Right-click a plate onto a blast brick to turn it into a reinforced blast brick. This is what we're going to do when we make the improved blast furnace later, but for right now I'm just decommissioning the one we have to steal some of its bricks for the induction furnace. Since there isn't a wandering trader on my island right now, I'm going to have to summon one. That means I'm going to have to kill one of the villagers that have been sitting in my storage. Oh well, that's another free space in storage to store something else. At least make sure you're using your special sword that gives you more souls though, so at least you get 3 instead of 1. Unfortunately, you can only buy 1 of the dreadful dirt creation tools from the trader at a given time, but that's okay, we can always wait for another to get more. This is just 1 to get us started. Feed that feed to the chicken and it will violently explode, producing a rotten egg. When you right click this on dirt, it will make a 5x5 of dreadful dirt centered on the block you clicked on. Using an angel block, I'm going to build a mob farm down at this lowish Y level. 1 to keep all the mobs away from the actual base, and 2 because apparently mob spawn rates are just a tiny bit higher the lower you go. I won't bore you with the building though. Now that I can place down this dreadful dirt, I can get the Reaper generator and start using that to make power. Every time the Reaper generator makes power, it consumes 1 soul catalyst, so you're going to want to make sure you stock up on it. I'll be automating that in just a moment. As far as using the Reaper generator goes, be mindful that you can't use it on soul cage mobs as they don't have a soul or something or other. It accepts runes. The only 2 that we can make right now are the one that increases its power, which I've already made, and the one that increases its range. Other than that, you can't really make the other ones yet, so it's not really worth thinking about. Cyclic fans are an easy and cheap way to ensure that all the mobs stay towards the killing end of the mob farm. They only require a redstone signal to work. Just make sure you block the back so no light can get through. Note that the Reaper generator activates once every 6 seconds without the velocity rune. Also note that you can only insert 1 of each rune at a time, so they don't have stacking effects. By turning in a quest for 10,000 RF, I can get a basic energy cube, which is a little bit of early energy storage for this Reaper generator. The Reaper generator doesn't seem to play nice with Immersive Engineering's wires, so you're going to want to be sure to use Ad Astra's cables instead. Also make sure that the energy cube's sides are oriented properly to accept and send the power. Here's my finalized system for automating soul catalysts. I received glowstone dust from the witch farm and they're sent through a whole chain of pedestals. Technically speaking, until the system is full, it's a little broken, but that's because the pedestal that's sending the items into the dropper is getting disabled. Once it's full, it does seem to work properly though, so I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, how this works is that those glowstone dust get sent into the precision dropper, and those get dropped into the soul fire. The item collector is filtered to only pick up soul dust, and it picks up soul dust that's both being produced from the soul fire and from the mobs when they die. There's a chance mobs drop soul powder when they're killed by the Reaper generator, so this is effectively a stockpile backlog. It makes sure that the chest has a particular threshold of soul powder in it at all given times. However, the comparator makes sure that it stops producing them if it has too much. A bulk blasting setup is what smelts the soul powder into catalysts. Man, mod authors and pack authors really don't know what a catalyst is, do they? I've definitely never made that mistake before, even though I shouldn't be. The item collector is then blacklisted to not pick up soul powder, and it picks up all the other mob drops. The last thing of note here is the ender inhibitor I've placed above the doorway. This makes sure that endermen can't teleport out. It's just crafted using some water crystals and a manasteel. The pedestals then send all the mob drops into the drawers above. I'll set up a system to manage those later. For right now, I think this is a good place to stop the episode. If you're curious, the Reaper generator seems to fluctuate in how much power it produces. Allegedly, you're intended to make like 120 RF per tick if you're efficient with this thing, and it probably makes around 80 on average. That's just what I've heard though, so take it with a grain of salt. I did end up making one of those range runes in the end, just because. If the witches end up blocking the doorway, that means everything still manages to get hit, so it's always good to have more RF coming in. But yeah, we've done a lot today, and I think that's a very good place to leave things off. I think I'm going to make a document of compiled tips, and I'll have ways to sort them by mod and by when I made it in the videos. So stay tuned for that. I'll make an extra video that just tells you about that and how it works and links to it. But anyway, this has been Pick. I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.